All right, let's dive in. Today we're exploring something that's been a bit of a philosophical puzzle forever, it seems. Beauty.
Yeah, beauty. It's a big one, right?
Huge. In Western thought, it's been right up there with truth, goodness, and justice. A real heavyweight.
Absolutely.
I mean, you think back to the ancient Greeks, then through the Hellenistic period, the medieval times, and then boom, the 18th and 19th centuries with all those heavy hitters. Shaftesbury, Hutcheson, Hume, Burke, you name it.
Kant, Schiller, Hegel, the list goes on.
They were all obsessed with beauty. It was central to their whole philosophical project.
It wasn't just like a side hobby for them. It was fundamental to understanding reality itself, even.
Right. But then something weird happened. As we hit the 20th century, beauty kind of faded, lost its shine in philosophy, and you even see it in art, too.
It's true. It's like it became suspect.
Exactly. Like we weren't supposed to care about beauty anymore, but then like a phoenix from the ashes, it comes back in the 80s.
And who brings it back?
Feminist philosophers.
Of course. Talk about a shake-up. They really challenged the old ways of thinking about beauty.
Big time. They made us confront the power dynamics, the social structures, all that messy stuff that influences how we see beauty.
Which, let's be honest, as philosophers, we should have been doing all along.
So that's our mission in this deep dive. We're dissecting these core debates about beauty, all the different ways philosophers have tried to wrap their heads around it. And to keep us grounded, we'll be working with the beauty entry from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
A solid foundation.
And where better to start than with that age-old question, is beauty objective or subjective?
The million-dollar question. It really is the central debate, isn't it?
It's the fork in the road. And as our source points out, both extremes, total objectivity or pure subjectivity, they both lead to some pretty tricky philosophical dead ends.
Yeah, if you go all in on one side, you end up with some problems.
Exactly. I mean, obviously our individual experiences matter, but it's also pretty hard to ignore the fact that we often agree on what's beautiful.
Right, there's something more to it than just, I like it, therefore it's beautiful. Isn't there?
So let's unpack this. The subjectivist view, as our source puts it, says that beauty is all in the eye of the beholder. They even quote Hume, that famous line, "Beauty is no quality in things themselves. It exists merely in the mind which contemplates them."
Classic Hume. Very empiricist. It's
Right.
all about perception, sensations, how our minds react.
And Kant, in his critique of judgment, seems to be on a similar page, right? He talks about the feeling of pleasure or pain being the basis for our judgment of taste.
But there's a subtle difference there.
Oh, for sure. Kant's trying to find a universal element within that subjectivity, which we'll get to later.
Yeah, Kant's always trying to bridge those gaps.
But first, let's stick with the subjectivists for a minute, because here's the problem, right? If we just say anything anyone finds beautiful, is beautiful, doesn't the whole idea of beauty just collapse? Like, it loses all meaning.
That's the danger, right? If my old coffee mug is just as beautiful as the Mona Lisa, just because I happen to like it, then haven't we lost something important?
Exactly. It's like saying good or bad doesn't mean anything. And plus, we argue about beauty all the time. We try to convince each other, right?
We make judgments. We compare. We even rank things. That suggests something more than just pure personal preferences going on.
100%. And that takes us to the opposite side, the objectivist view. Our source tells us this was the dominant view for a long time, especially in ancient and medieval thought.
They believed beauty was inherent, built in. It wasn't about us. It was about the object itself.
Right. Augustine flips Hume's idea completely. He says things delight us because they are beautiful, not the other way around.
It makes sense in their worldview, right? Beauty was a reflection of the divine order, the perfection of the cosmos.
Okay, so where do Plato and Plotinus fit into all of this? They connect beauty to love and desire, but they locate the source of beauty somewhere else entirely. For Plato, it's the realm of forms. For Plotinus, it's this idea of formedness, the source of unity. There's a great quote from Plotinus where he talks about ugliness being matter that hasn't been fully shaped by form.
Yeah, for them, beauty wasn't just a visual thing. It was about the underlying structure of reality, the intelligibility, the unity.
And this leads us right into the classical conception of beauty, doesn't it? The idea of beauty as a harmonious arrangement of parts, proportion, symmetry, clarity. Aristotle's in this camp big time. He talks about order, symmetry, definiteness, all that good stuff.
The Greeks, always with the order and symmetry.
Right. And then we have Polykleitos with his famous canon trying to codify the ideal human proportions, and Vitruvius, who lays out these principles for architecture, order, arrangement, proportion, symmetry, decor, and distribution. He even says, and I love this quote, that symmetry is the appropriate harmony arising out of the details.
It's all about balance, finding that perfect ratio, that sweet spot where everything just fits.
And Aquinas jumps in too, with his 3 essential requirements for beauty: integrity, due proportion, and clarity. It's all very systematic, almost mathematical in its approach.
Like they were trying to crack the code of beauty, turn it into a formula.
Which some of them actually tried to do. Hutcheson, for example, in the 18th century, he goes all in on this mathematical theory of beauty. He calls it a compound ratio of uniformity and variety. He even thinks things like Euclid's geometrical proofs are beautiful because of their logical structure.
Hutcheson's interesting. He's like, look, beauty isn't random. There are underlying principles, mathematical ratios at play.
But then along comes Burke, and he's like, hold on a second. He looks at nature, flowers, swans, the human body, and he says, hang on, specific proportions don't guarantee beauty.
Right. Burke's like, nature's messy, it's wild. There's beauty in the irregularities, too.
And he makes this great point, that a skilled painter can make an ugly figure, even if the proportions are technically perfect.
It's a good point. It throws a wrench in the whole classical machine.
And this brings us back to that subjectivity debate, which really heats up in the 18th century. Pleasure takes center stage. Locke's distinction between primary and secondary qualities, remember that. It plays a role here. The idea that color, for example, is mind-dependent, it's not really in the object itself. It becomes an analogy for beauty.
Yeah, the empiricists come along, and they're all about sensory experience. So beauty becomes a feeling, a response to something that gives us pleasure.
But Hume and Kant, they weren't satisfied with that, were they? They saw that we argue about beauty, that we try to persuade each other, and that suggests something more than just, oh, I like this.
Right. If it's all just personal taste, why bother discussing it, debating it?
So they both try to bridge this gap between the subjective and the objective. Kant even gives it a fancy name, the antinomy of taste.
Kant loves his fancy names.
He does. But the point is, they're both trying to figure out how taste can be subjective, rooted in our individual feelings, but at the same time, allow for some kind of standard, some way to say one taste is better than another.
It's a tricky balance, for sure.
Okay, so Hume's approach, as our source explains it, is this.
Yeah.
He focuses on the idea of a qualified critic. Someone with super sharp senses, refined taste, tons of experience, someone who can compare and contrast, and who's totally unbiased. He says that if enough of these qualified critics agree on something, that's our practical standard. It's like a consensus theory of aesthetic value.
So it's not like there's some objective rule book for beauty. But if the people who really know their stuff, if they mostly agree, that's as good as we're going to get.
Exactly. And Kant, as you might expect, goes in a different direction. He's still grounding taste in subjective feeling, but he introduces this crucial concept, disinterestedness. He says when we judge something as beautiful, we have to do it without any personal desires or interests getting in the way.
Like you're not appreciating something because it's useful to you or because it's going to make you money. Right.
He even uses this example from Shaftesbury about looking at a valley. You can look at it as potential real estate, or you can look at it for its own sake, just for its beauty. And for Kant, that second way, that's the key.
So it's like you're stepping back from your own personal needs and desires and just experiencing the object purely.
And Kant takes this even further. He distinguishes between dependent and free beauty. Things like abstract designs, flowers, those are free beauty. We appreciate them for their pure form. But something like a racehorse, well, that's dependent beauty, because we're already judging it based on our idea of what a good racehorse should be.
So free beauty is like pure beauty, untainted by concepts or purposes.
And then there's Kant's big idea, the one that really ties it all together, universalization. He says when we judge something as beautiful, we're implicitly saying that anyone else in the same situation should feel the same way. It's a claim to what we might call intersubjective validity.
It's like you're making a demand, right?
Yeah.
Not just, I like this, but you should like this too.
And that's why we argue about beauty. Because we believe there's a right answer, even if it's ultimately based on our feelings. Okay, our source then mentions a bunch of other thinkers, Schopenhauer, Hanslick, Bullo, Croce. They all have their own takes on this, but let's jump to Santayana for a second. He comes up with this idea of objectified pleasure. He says beauty is pleasure, but it's pleasure that we kind of project onto the object itself.
This is like we're taking our feeling and making it a quality of the thing.
Exactly. He gives us a nice definition. Beauty is positive, intrinsic, and objectified pleasure. But our source also raises a really good question. Are we just tricking ourselves when we do this? Are we attributing subjective states to things that don't actually have those states?
It's the age-old philosophical problem, right?
Yeah.
Can we really separate our experience from the world itself?
And this kind of leads us into why beauty went out of fashion in the 20th century. Our source points to a couple of things. First, there was this feeling that beauty had been trivialized by all this subjectivism.
If beauty's just a matter of taste, well, then it doesn't seem very serious, does it?
And second, beauty got tangled up in politics and economics. Arthur Danto even wrote a book about this called The Abuse of Beauty.
Right. Beauty starts getting used to sell products, to promote ideologies, to justify all sorts of things.
So it's no wonder philosophers were like, we're better off without this. But then, as we said, it comes back in the 90s. Thinkers like Dave Hickey come along and they're like, hey, beauty matters. And feminist philosophers like Brand and Irigaray, they start critiquing the concept, but they're also reclaiming it.
It's a much-needed reevaluation.
And G.E. Moore even suggests that beauty is a necessary part of anything truly good. He's connecting beauty to morality, which is really interesting.
It's like they're saying we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Beauty's complex, it's messy, but it's still important.
And then we get these more relational views, like Sartwell's. He says beauty isn't just in the object or the subject, it's in the relationship between them.
Like when you look up at the night sky. The beauty isn't just in the stars themselves, it's in that awe-inspiring experience, that sense of connection to something vast and mysterious.
Exactly. And Mihamas takes us even further. He says beauty is like an invitation. It draws you in. It makes you want to explore, to interpret, to share your experience with others. He even says that beauty creates these smaller, shifting communities of appreciation.
So it's not just about individual experience. Beauty brings people together.
Okay, so now that we've got this big picture view, our source starts diving into specific philosophical conceptions of beauty. We're going to revisit some familiar territory here, but with more detail.
Sounds good.
So first up, the classical conception. Wölfflin gives us a really vivid description of Renaissance art, with its focus on perfect proportion, clear and distinct elements.
It's all very ordered, very controlled.
Right. And then we go back to Aristotle and the Poetics and the Metaphysics. He's all about order and symmetry, even using mathematical principles like the golden section to explain beauty. And of course, the Parthenon and Polykleitos' canon are prime examples of this classical aesthetic.
It's like they're trying to find the mathematical blueprint for beauty, the perfect formula.
And they even measured it out. There's this great quote from Galen where he talks about the canon, and he's describing how Polykleitos literally measured every single part of the body and gave precise ratios for everything.
That's dedication to proportion.
And it's important to remember that symmetry for the Greeks wasn't just about mirror images. It was this broader concept of harmony, balance, even moral goodness. Plato talks about virtuous souls having a kind of inner symmetry.
It's like symmetry reflected this deeper order, both in the world and in ourselves.
And then we go back to Vitruvius, and we get a fuller picture of his 6 principles: order, arrangement, proportion, symmetry, decor, and distribution. It's his recipe for achieving that appropriate harmony arising out of the details.
He's giving us the architectural blueprint.
And Aquinas, with his criteria of integrity, due proportion, and clarity, he's basically summarizing the whole classical aesthetic in a nutshell.
It's a pretty comprehensive system.
Oh, yeah. And Hutcheson comes back with his mathematical theories. He's trying to link beauty to this interplay of uniformity and variety, and he even finds beauty in things like Newton's law of gravitation.
He's like, beauty's not just in art, it's in the fabric of the universe.
But then, of course, Burke comes along with his reality check.
Burke always keeping things grounded.
He reminds us that beauty in nature, in art, it often defies these strict formulas. And his point that an artist can deliberately create ugliness, even with perfect proportions, that's hard to ignore.
It's a good reminder that beauty's more complex, more elusive than any formula can capture.
Okay, let's move on to the idealist conception. Our source contrasts Plato's discussion in the Republic with his view in the Symposium, where beauty takes on this whole new meaning. It becomes about perfect unity.
It's a more spiritual, transcendent kind of beauty.
Exactly. And we learn about Diotimus' teachings, about love, and the desire for immortality. There's that beautiful passage in the Symposium where Plato describes the ascent of love, how it starts with appreciating individual beauty, but then it moves beyond that to a vision of universal beauty itself.
It's like beauty becomes a pathway of knowledge, a glimpse of the divine.
And Plotinus enters the conversation again. This time, he's directly challenging the classical idea that only complex things can be beautiful. He says, no, true beauty is in the simple, in the unified. He elevates light as the most beautiful physical thing because it's so close to the immaterial.
Plotinus is a fascinating figure. He's got this whole mystical cosmology, and beauty plays a central role in it.
And this leads us into the medieval understanding of God's beauty. Thinkers like Pseudo-Dionysius and Sugar, they see beauty in the created world as a reflection of God's perfect beauty. And Sugar, in particular, he describes the beauty of St. Denis as this ecstatic, almost mystical experience.
Beauty becomes a path to spiritual enlightenment, a way to connect with the divine.
And this idealist thread continues into the modern period with thinkers like Shaftesbury, Schiller, and Hegel.
They're all trying to figure out how beauty bridges the gap between the senses and the spirit.
Shaftesbury, for example, he has this hierarchical view of beauty culminating in the divine intelligence that creates all forms.
It's a very grand, very ambitious view of beauty.
Schiller, on the other hand, he's more interested in how beauty helps us become fully human. He talks about this integration of the senses and reason through beauty, play, and art.
He's like, beauty isn't just about pleasure, it's about becoming whole, about achieving freedom.
And then there's Hegel, of course. He sees beauty as part of this grand unfolding of the absolute spirit. It's linked to freedom, to the realization of our true potential.
Hegel's always got to tie everything back to the absolute.
He does. And then we have Croce, who takes an even more extreme idealist stance. He basically denies the existence of natural beauty, saying it's all just a reflection of art.
It's like he's saying nature's only beautiful because it reminds us of art.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about love and longing. We've already heard Burke connect beauty to love, but our source points out that even in objectivist accounts, there's this recognition of the intense subjective experience involved. Think about Plotinus talking about ecstasy, or the idea that the soul recognizes its true home in beauty.
Beauty can be a powerful, even overwhelming experience. It can evoke all sorts of emotions, not just pleasure.
Right. And then there's Sappho, that famous fragment where she says, what one loves best is the most beautiful sight. Even Socrates in Plato's Phaedrus, he defers to Sappho when it comes to understanding love.
It's a reminder that our personal affections, our desires, they shape how we see beauty.
And then there's Plato's amazing description of love in the Symposium. Remember that. Love is the child of poverty and plenty, always yearning, always seeking fulfillment through beauty. He even describes love as harsh, arid, barefoot, and homeless.
It's a powerful image. It captures that sense of longing, of incompleteness that drives us to seek out beauty.
And the entry mentions courtly love in the Middle Ages, and then these more recent philosophers like Sartwell and Nahamas who put love and longing at the heart of beauty.
They're moving away from a purely pleasure-based view.
Right. Sartwell even defines beauty as the object of longing, and he argues that longing is a fundamental human condition. And Nahamas, he says beauty is like an emblem of what we lack. It guides our desire and makes us feel more alive.
They're connecting beauty to our deepest needs and desires.
Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about hedonist conceptions. We know the 18th century empiricists were all about pleasure, and they explained beauty in terms of the pleasure it gives us. Muratori, for example, he says beauty is simply whatever delights us with agreeable sensations.
It's a pretty straightforward view. Beauty equals pleasure.
Hutcheson pops up again here, but this time he's explicitly linking his compound ratio to the production of pleasure. He even compares his preferences to Plotinus, and he talks about the different kinds of pleasure we get from different kinds of beauty.
He's getting into the nuances of pleasure, the different flavors, you might say.
And Hume, in his treatise, he defines beauty as that particular order and construction of parts, which is fitted to give pleasure and satisfaction to the soul.
So for Hume, it's all about how our minds react to certain arrangements of things.
And this idea that beauty is a type of pleasure, it really takes hold. Kant refines it, of course, with his idea of disinterestedness. But even Santayana, much later, he's still talking about beauty as a kind of pleasure.
It becomes a dominant way of thinking about beauty.
But then along come the positivists, and they're like, nope, beauty is a meaningless word.
The positivists always trying to clean things up, get rid of anything that can't be measured or empirically verified.
Exactly. Ayer, for example, he says, aesthetic terms are just expressions of emotion. They don't actually refer to anything in the world.
So beauty gets dismissed as a legitimate philosophical question.
And that's one of the reasons why, for a while, beauty kind of disappeared from philosophy. If it's just a subjective feeling, why bother talking about it?
It's a valid question.
Okay, last section before we get into the politics of beauty. Use and uselessness. We've talked about Kant and his idea of beauty as disinterested pleasure. He even says, taste is the faculty of judging an object or a method of representing it by an entirely disinterested satisfaction or dissatisfaction.
It's all about appreciating something for its own sake, not for what it can do for you.
And Bulla talks about psychical distance, this idea that we have to detach ourselves from our practical concerns in order to experience beauty.
It's like putting on a special set of glasses that filter out all the utilitarian stuff.
But then we get this completely opposite view, that beauty is all about usefulness. Theodorus the atheist, he links a woman's beauty to her usefulness, very bluntly.
Theodorus, always keeping it real.
And then there's Socrates in Xenophon's Memorabilia. He argues that anything useful is also good and beautiful. He uses this example of a dung basket and a golden shield. The dung basket, it's ugly but useful. The golden shield, it's beautiful but useless in battle.
So he's saying, look, beauty's not just about appearances. It's about function, about how well something serves its purpose.
Berkeley also gets in on this. He starts by defining beauty as what pleases us, but then he ties that pleasure to the object's usefulness.
So it's not just about immediate sensory gratification. It's about understanding how something works, how it fits into the world.
And this leads to some interesting critiques of the whole art versus craft distinction. Kumaraswamy, for example, he says a well-made sword and a well-made scalpel, they have the same kind of beauty.
It's beauty in function, in craftsmanship.
And finally, we have Scruton. He kind of brings us back to Kant, but with a twist. He still emphasizes the pleasure we get from contemplating something for its own sake, but he also questions whether we can really separate subjective experience from objective qualities.
Scruton's trying to find that middle ground, that sweet spot between the subjective and the objective.
And he uses this great analogy of a kiss. He says, when we kiss, we are not seeking a sensation. We are seeking the other. We are touching the other's self.
It's a beautiful way of putting it. It shows how profound pleasure can come from a sense of connection, of recognizing something beyond just the surface.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, but we're not done yet. Now we get to the really interesting stuff. The politics of beauty.
This is where it gets real, right?
Exactly. Because as we've seen, beauty isn't just this abstract philosophical idea. It's deeply embedded in our social and political lives.
It's used to justify power, to create hierarchies, to sell products.
So we start with aristocracy and capital. The French Revolution, they link beauty to the aristocracy, to the Rococo style, and it leads to this whole moral and political backlash.
So people are like, we're over here starving and you're worried about fancy furniture and powdered wigs.
Exactly. And then in the 20th century, beauty gets tied to capitalism. It's used to manipulate consumers, to create desire for products.
Think about advertising, the beauty industry, the whole culture of consumerism.
And the Marxists, they critique beauty as part of the superstructure, part of the ideology that maintains the status quo.
They see it as a distraction from the real issues, the economic inequalities.
And even Marx himself, his views on beauty change over time. Early on, he sees beauty as this inherent part of human creativity. But later, he becomes more critical, seeing it as a tool of ideological control.
It's like he realizes the power of beauty to both liberate and oppress.
And then, of course, there's the Nazis. They twist the idea of beauty into something horrific, using it to promote their ideology of racial purity.
It's a chilling example of how beauty can be weaponized.
And in reaction to all of this, you get the Dada movement. They're so disillusioned by the horrors of World War I, they reject the very idea of beauty, along with truth and justice. Max Ernst even says, Dada is a state of mind. Dada is against the future. Dada is a death sentence for all these ideals, which for centuries have been cherished as the highest achievements of mankind.
They're like, if these ideals led to this, then we don't want them anymore.
And Adorno comes along and he says, look, art shouldn't be trying to be beautiful in a world full of ugliness. He thinks art should be exposing the ugliness, making us confront the injustice.
He's saying beauty can be a form of escapism. We need to face the reality of suffering.
All of this really throws a wrench in the traditional theories of beauty, doesn't it? The Greeks, with their harmony and proportion, it all seems so naive now.
It does. The political dimension of beauty makes it much more complex, much more challenging.
Okay, now for one of the most important critiques, the feminist critique. Feminists point out how beauty has historically been used to objectify and control women.
They're saying, look, beauty standards are often about power, not about aesthetics.
Exactly. Our source mentions 19th century feminists who critiqued these restrictive beauty norms that were imposed on women.
They were fighting against corsets, against restrictive clothing, against the whole idea that women should be beautiful for men.
And then you have McKinnon, who talks about the male guise, the way women are constructed as objects for male pleasure.
It's not just about looking, it's about power. The power to define, to control, to possess.
And Mulvey, she does this psychoanalytic critique of cinema, and she comes to this radical conclusion. Analyzing pleasure and beauty, taking them apart, that's how you dismantle them.
It's like she's saying, if we understand how these mechanisms of pleasure and objectification work, we can break free from them.
She even says beauty is at the heart of our oppression. And art historians like Nauckland and Pollock, they start applying this lens to painting, showing how famous nude paintings often reinforce this male gaze.
They're reinterpreting the canon, showing how art has been complicit in upholding these power structures.
And then there's the famous incident where a suffragette slashes the Rokeby Venus.
It's a powerful act of defiance, a refusal to be objectified.
And Naomi Wolf, in her book The Beauty Myth, she analyzes how contemporary beauty standards in the media, in popular culture, how they still constrain women, how they lead to self-destructive behaviors.
It's like the beauty myth has evolved, but it's still just as powerful.
In Irigaray, she adds another layer to this. She says female beauty is often designed to attract the male gaze, not to express female subjectivity.
It's like women are performing beauty for someone else, not for themselves.
Wolf has this great line. She says, sex is held hostage by beauty in literature, poetry, painting, and film.
It's everywhere, this idea that a woman's worth is tied to her beauty.
Okay, now let's talk about colonialism and race. Our source starts with Marcus Garvey in the early 20th century. He critiques white beauty standards as a tool of oppression for Black people.
He sees it as a form of internalized racism, where Black people start to see themselves through the lens of white supremacy.
And you see this in things like skin bleaching, hair straightening.
It's the pressure to conform, to assimilate.
And Malcolm X, he talks about his own experience with conking his hair. He realizes later that it was an act of self-degradation, rooted in this belief that whiteness is superior.
It's a powerful personal story about the psychological impact of these racist beauty standards.
And then you have the Black is Beautiful movement, which is all about affirming Black beauty, creating a new standard that's not based on white ideals.
It's about reclaiming beauty, redefining it on their own terms.
And Edward Said, with his concept of Orientalism, he shows how colonialism used beauty as a tool of domination.
Western cultures would appropriate and distort non-Western beauty standards, often to justify their own superiority.
And you see this in the looting of artifacts, the way colonial powers would take these objects and display them in their museums as if they were trophies.
It's a reminder of how deeply entwined beauty is with power.
But it's not all doom and gloom. Our source ends with beauty and resistance. There are these counter-beauties emerging, ways of challenging and subverting these oppressive beauty standards. The disability arts movement, feminist art, they're finding new ways to express beauty, to celebrate difference.
They're showing that beauty isn't just one thing, it's multiple, it's fluid, it's constantly evolving.
And Brand says something.